the world of tech startups and mergers and acquisitions, SAP and Amazon's involvement with AI, and an ERP implementation success case study. Those are just a few of the things we'll cover here in episode 219 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello and welcome to episode number 219 of Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And this is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. It's a tech agnostic view of the world of strategy, people, process, technology within digital transformation. So thanks for being here today. Joining me as always is our co-host, Darian Fiatkuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Great show planned for you today, episode 219. We've got some social media questions we're going to start off with. We're going to get into some newsworthy topics as it relates to SAP and how SAP is embedding more AI into S4HANA. We're going to talk about Amazon and how it's slowing down its AI expansion. I'm really interested to hear about that. And then later in the show, we'll have our guest on, Adam Haynes from GLC Advisors. He's going to be on the show with me talking about tech startups and the world of mergers and acquisitions within the technology, software, and services space. So if you're either an entrepreneur or a founder of a tech-related company, you'll definitely want to listen in on this. And if you're a CIO or a project team member that might be looking to partner with or acquire services or products from a tech company, whether it's a startup or a high-growth company, you'll want to check it out too, just to get inside the mind of investors and what they look for in their tech investments. So he'll be on the show with me talking about tech startups and mergers and acquisitions in the tech space. And then finally, later in the show, we'll get into an actual client case study. It's one of our clients who is actually very successful in their implementation. We talk on this podcast, and I talk on my YouTube channel quite a bit about failures and lessons from failures. But in this case, we're going to talk about a success. It wasn't an easy project by any means, but it was a successful one. We'll talk about the key things that this client did differently that made them successful. And it's also the things you can do on your project and you should do on your project to make yourselves more successful too. So be sure to stick around for that. But before we jump into our guests and some of our other newsworthy topics, we've got some social media questions we've received lately. Darian, what do you have in store for us?
Yeah, this first question's good. So this one is a competitive company run on their own unique business strategy, which is realized as its business model. Major flaw in ERP implementations is business strategy can be fixed by extensive feature customizations and trying to cover the issues at operational level, which puts you into a financial trap. Great source of revenue for ERP. Do you think ERP companies are not aware of these issues? And after spending $600 million, is Lidl, this company, have they not been considered given all the directions by SAP? And at least, would the ERP company not advise change management? And another question, even after a little sympathy for victimized company, aka Lidl in this case, to help fix the issue by guiding them. I guess there's a lot of questions in that. But
yeah, there's a lot to that. And I assume that was on the video case study that I did on YouTube about the Lidl SAP implementation, where they spent $600 million on their implementation and it failed. They ended up not using that instance of SAP that they had spent $600 million on. And so that question's related to that. And I think the first part of that question is super interesting. And I think maybe that's the heart of the question, which is let's take an example of a company like Amazon. So Amazon, one of the most valuable companies in the world in terms of market capitalization and overall valuation. They're one of the most successful growth stories and success stories of the last, generation for sure. To go from nothing in the 90s to this big, massive behemoth of a company that it is now, 30 years later, it's a pretty impressive growth trajectory that they followed. And the reason I bring up Amazon is because you think about Amazon, like, do you think they became successful largely because they had a big, massive ERP implementation that automated all their processes and allowed them to scale? Or was it because they built their own strategy, their own business model, and they created technology around that to support that unique business model rather than going and getting something off the shelf that anyone else could have used as well? And it might be an extreme example, but you have to look at things that way in some cases to say, well, Amazon might be an extreme example where they've got such a unique business model. They're pioneering all these things like machine learning and AI. They're one of the early pioneers of that in their business model, but they didn't do that by implementing off the shelf software and spending hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars on that. So, they created their own technology. And I'm not saying that the average manufacturer or the average non-tech related company should go out and just invest a ton of money developing their own custom software, because there are some things that you want to automate, and there are some things within your business that might be kind of vanilla business processes, and that might be okay just to go get off the shelf software to automate that stuff because it's not really giving you a competitive advantage. Your advantage is going to be to drive your costs down and to become more efficient and to scale the organization and some of these back office functions. But the things that make you different, that give you that unique competitive advantage, the thing that's a unique strategy for you as an organization, those are things that you're not going to find, nor would you want to find off the shelf in an ERP system. So you can't expect that by implementing SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or whatever software vendor you want to insert here, you can't assume that you're going to give yourself any sort of material competitive advantage by buying that software off the shelf, because all your competitors are using it too, and other companies and other verticals are using it too. So in order to have that true competitive advantage, there's probably going to be either a case where you either have to create some custom development to give yourself that unique competitive advantage and make it harder to replicate. Or maybe it's your use of mixing and matching different technologies to fit your model in the best way possible. So if you're going to use off the shelf technology, this is where it might behoove you to consider best of breed solutions, interoperability types of solutions, or low code, no code development platforms where you can kind of create your own, version of different types of software. So I think being creative and really being deliberate about how you leverage technology in your company is really important. And too often companies expect that their big, massive investments in new ERP systems are going to somehow solve all the problems and give them a strategic advantage, when it's absolutely not going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super interesting. You made some really great points there. And our next question here I find really interesting as well. This one is, let's assume a company is on SAP, ECC, R3, etc. They find it really hard and frustrating to move to S4HANA, and they choose to rethink everything, start all over, and they choose another vendor that's not SAP. Has this case ever happened until now?
Yeah, it has. I mean, we get clients that hire us to assess whether or not they should go with S4HANA. And they also, in some cases, will say, we're not at all certain that we want to stick with SAP. So let's look at what our other options are. I'd actually say that's becoming less common. I think there's more vendor lock now than there was, say, 10 or 20 years ago, especially with SAP. And because if you think about it, these big companies that have built decades of competencies and knowledge and know-how related to one platform, that's really hard to undo. That's a big, massive change to say, we're going to go from SAP ECC now to Microsoft Dynamics or to Oracle Fusion. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it or you shouldn't consider it by any means. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm suggesting is that it's just more difficult. The threshold that has to be met for a replacement product is a lot higher, because if you think about it, if let's just say there's a product out there that could give you 5% more value than what you might get out of SAP. Well, that 5% more, is that really worth the risk and the disruption and the fact that you're going to have to overhaul your entire IT staff and, completely change everything about ERP internally? It's just a higher threshold to set, to justify the added risk. Having said that, however, I would also say that going from ECC and especially R3, which is even older than ECC, if you're jumping from one of those old legacy systems to S4HANA, it is a re-implementation. So it's an entirely different platform. The database is entirely different. The GUI is different. The tools, development tools are different. Everything's different about it. It does have some familiarity because it's still SAP. So there's going to be a learning curve advantage there. So what I said is still true, but maybe a little less true now because going from ECC to S4HANA is such a big jump anyway. So a lot of companies are saying, well, if you have to make this big jump and it's so different, why not also look at other options that are out there? I think the reasons you might consider moving away from the SAP ecosystem, or at least diversifying outside the SAP ecosystem so you're not so heavily concentrated in one vendor, is just that vendor lock. I mean, we're seeing now big Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 multinational companies that are paying the price for the fact that they're so locked into SAP that now they're essentially being forced to go to S4HANA by 2030, or else they're going to lose support on ECC and R3. I'm not saying that you should do it just because SAP says you should, but that's what a lot of companies are doing. I would say do whatever you want. I would say ignore SAP. They have no right to tell you when you do or you should or shouldn't move to a new system. But a lot of organizations feel like they have to. They feel beholden to SAP, being the big, massive company that it is. And the fact that they have one vendor running their entire back office operations, that's a lot of risk there. So I'd say strategically, you might want to consider diversifying. And if you're going to stick with go with S4HANA, I would suggest looking at where could you move away or hedge against S4HANA and augment S4HANA with other technologies that might be able to give you more of what you need. And it lessens your dependency on SAP so that in the future, the next time they decide they're going to force you into some sort of upgrade or change, you're not quite as held hostage as you might be feeling right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of SAP, they are our first newsworthy article of the day is actually about them. So SAP just announced it's putting what they call AI jewels into every corner of S4HANA. And this is a pretty interesting move, honestly. They're not releasing separate AI tools. They're embedding AI directly into core modules like finance, supply chain, and customer service. That means in finance, AI helps automate invoice matching and flag unusual transactions. In supply chain, AI predicts demand and recommends inventory adjustments in real time. In customer service, it's AI-powered chatbots and sentiment analysis tools built right into the service. The goal here from SAP is to eliminate the need for third-party AI tools, which is interesting because you just mentioned how SAP is trying to do, everything for you as a customer if you are their customer.
Called it.
But yeah, sorry, what did you say?
I called it.
Yes. And but the goal of this is to obviously help make smart decisions and part on the day-to-day workflows. But of course, the big question is whether this is an actual transformation or just another feature set customers won't fully use unless it's configured and adopted properly. So Eric, I'll kind of let you just give your initial reaction to this before I ask some more follow-up questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's smart. It's a smart strategy for SAP. I don't think it's a smart solution for customers necessarily. I mean, if you're SAP, you don't want there to be other third-party AI providers in there. You want everything to run through SAP, and it increases your vendor lock. It makes switching costs a lot higher, and it locks you in long-term, and that's what every software company dreams of. So I guess if you're an investor in SAP or if you're SAP, that's great. But we tend to look at things from the customer perspective because we work for our clients. We don't work for the software vendors, and we don't represent the software vendors. So the beauty of being tech agnostic is I don't really care that that's good for SAP. It's cool, good for them. It's neat to know they've got some cool little AI agents, just like everyone else does. Doesn't mean that the customer should be fully bought into that or going all in on SAP. I'd still say, AI is something that you don't need. That it's the one thing you don't really need your ERP vendor for. You need the ERP solution to provide data to feed AI, but you don't need your ERP vendor to be the provider of AI. They want you to feel that way. I mean, the ERP vendors are positioning themselves as, we've got the data, we've got the single source of truth, we manage all your workflows, so we should also be the ones to to manage your AI or provide that AI solution. That's one option, but you've got plenty of other options that are probably going to be lower cost. And again, hedge your risk and diversify away from being all in on one vendor. So, and there's something to be said too by working with some of these smaller, more nimble AI startup type companies, or some of these low code, no code development platforms that you can develop, more custom-ish sorts of solutions without all the risk and cost and headache that goes along with it. So, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but that's my knee-jerk reaction to it.
Yeah, for sure. I have follow-up to that. How would a company, if they aren't going to go with, AI that's built into their ERP system, how do they go about selecting an AI that would be best for them to use as a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I just understand how you want to use AI, and that's hard because I think most clients we work with don't fully understand the possibilities of AI, and that's understandable because AI has just evolved so quickly that businesses are still, a lot of businesses we work with are still running on old mainframes or old on-prem systems. So they haven't even moved to the cloud yet. They haven't even, cleaned up their data yet. So there's all these basic fundamental things that they haven't done yet, to where they're nowhere close to being mature enough to really start embracing AI. They can have that vision for the future of what they want to get out of AI, but I would start there and say, what do you want to get out of it? And then also, just as importantly, look at where you are today. Look at your maturity level, your readiness, the gap between where you are today versus where you want to go, and then start to put those foundational pieces in place that will allow you to go down that path, or start heading down the path of AI. So I would say, before you start thinking about specific AI tools, define what it is you need and want, define those future state processes, define where you are today and what that delta is, and then start to put together a roadmap that's pretty selective and targeted in terms of how we want to use AI and close that gap between current state and future state. And then based on that, that's how you evaluate. That's the lens you use to evaluate potential AI providers. And when I say AI providers, I don't mean necessarily just an AI company or an AI solution. I mean, it could be, like I said, a development platform like a Rapid or a Palantir, or one of those types of companies that provide a workflow engine with AI, and they also provide development tools and a platform to develop low-code, no-code solutions on. That might be your use of AI. It's giving you more than AI, but it could be a way to sort of augment what you've got without necessarily having to go through your ERP vendor for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking into AI, we're going to kind of go into our next newsworthy article here, which is Amazon is slowing down their AI expansion. So they really slammed the brakes, I guess, or are tapping the brakes instead of slamming on AI infrastructure build out, following a similar move that Microsoft made just a few weeks ago. And according to the new report, Amazon is pausing some data center lease discussions, especially outside of the US. Now, AWS says this isn't a pullback, it's just a routine capacity management, but two hyperscalers are starting to slow down expansion at the same time. It kind of raises eyebrows for people. Amazon says it still plans to invest over $100 billion in AI data centers over the next decade, but right now they're reevaluating leases, costs, and delivery timelines, possibly due to economic pressure, new tariffs, anything like that. AWS says demand is still strong, but they're moving more cautiously and they're prioritizing flexibility in where and how they scale. So, Eric, do you think this is a strategic slowdown to stay lean, or is a signal that the AI rush is maybe cooling off, at least temporarily right now?
I don't know. That actually surprises me. I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know the answer to that question, because I don't have a good read on it. I mean, I would think one thing that might be happening is maybe they just got too far ahead of themselves as far as just over investing and overestimating the demand for their AI services, potentially relative to others. But Amazon is such a massive hyperscaler that that's what surprises me, because so many companies are using AWS, Amazon Web Services, for AI purposes as far as hosting data, hosting applications. It would just make sense that you could also use them for some of these AI, some of the AI capacity building. So I don't know. I'd be curious to hear from the audience if anyone has any insights as to why that would be. But that's a really interesting data point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish that we had last episode's guest here to ask this question, but could economic pressures, tariffs, and energy costs be forcing like these hyperscalers to rethink how they're scaling?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was something with that, because I know, a lot of people don't think about it, but AI just consumes so much, not just computing power and data center space, but energy. Yeah, energy consumption is materially impacted by it too. So the U.S. has, at least in the United States, I can't speak for every part of the world, but in the U.S., we have plenty of power. That's not that. I don't think that would be a roadblock or a bottleneck. All I could think is maybe there's a need to have more distributed data centers or more distributed computing power throughout the world outside North America. So they're throttling back on investments here. It could be that maybe AI is growing even faster in other parts of the world. I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that it could be, but that's an interesting to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one more question. Do you think that this is like a signal that Amazon is like a smart play, or do you think that they're signaling kind of to the rest of the market? And do you think we'll see some others kind of follow in the steps of Amazon and Microsoft right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess time will tell if it's a smart play or not. I wonder if that's going to drive costs up. If there's not enough capacity, and I'm not saying there's not, but if they slow down the build out of this infrastructure required for AI scaling, then that's just going to drive up costs of AI and technology in general going forward. So that would be my only kind of red flag I'd have in the back of my mind. Is I'm not saying Amazon should just go blindly continue investing if it doesn't make sense, but I wonder if they're being too conservative, maybe because interest rates are high and economic uncertainty and geopolitical turmoil, all that stuff. Maybe that's just all leading to uncertainty, which uncertainty oftentimes leads to cutting back investments in general, whether it's the right decision or not. So longer term. So that could be part of it, I would imagine. But I just worry about the long-term implications that could translate to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a great point. But I'm excited to kind of get into this conversation today, talking about investing. We'll get more into that.
Yeah, investing, tech startups, mergers and acquisitions. We're going to cover a topic we haven't really covered at all on this podcast before. So I'm really excited for this because it's a first-time guest and first time we cover this topic related to kind of an investment banker's point of view as it relates to technology-related startups, whether it's a software company or a services company or both. What are some of the things that investors look for, and what should you be looking for as a buyer or a potential customer of these big tech companies or of these high growth tech companies? What are some of the things you should be thinking about? This is someone I've known for a long time, just never had him on the podcast. I've known him for over a decade. His name is Adam Haynes. He's with a company called GLC Advisors. And so he is an investment banker that essentially represents sellers, and he goes and finds buyers for those sellers and tries to maximize the value and of the investments they get. So we'll talk to him and get his perspective on tech startups and mergers and acquisitions in the tech space. Should be a really interesting conversation. And then later in the show, we're going to get into a client case study, one of our many successful ERP clients, but this one is a big, massive $25 billion organization that went through an ERP implementation recently. It was actually a 7-year implementation. And there's some things that they did distinctly different than most of our clients and most companies out there. And that's a big part of why they were so successful. And quite frankly, one of the more successful clients I've ever worked with and companies I've ever worked with. So really excited to share that case study with you here later today. So before all that, though, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long to hear the truth.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 219. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here at Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show every week by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions and sponsored by Third Stage Consulting. So if you'd like to learn more about Third Stage and how we can help you from a tech-agnostic advisory perspective, please reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. And I'm excited for our guest here today. Adam Haynes is with GLC Advisors. He's an investment banker. He finds sellers, or he finds buyers for sellers, and he basically puts together people that are interested in investing money in tech startups, and he puts them together with the sellers of those tech startups, whether it's a software company or a service company or both. And so we're going to talk about what's going on in the tech startup and high growth tech space, including mergers and acquisitions and what's happening there. So all that being said, Adam, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. And I guess for those that don't know you, I've known you for over a decade. We go back, and we've been in touch over the years, and I know a lot about you and about your company. But for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. So I spent a decent part of my formative years in the Bay Area. So I was born in San Jose and then moved back for high school. And technology was really taken off. Kind of mid 80s to mid 90s. That was really a big, interesting, the personal computer. And so I really fell in love with technology at that point. So I'm a tech banker, have been a tech banker for 30 years. After business school, worked in New York, worked in Minneapolis, worked in Boston, founded a firm here with other partners in Denver as a middle market M&A boutique. And that's what we do at GLC Advisors, which is where I work right now, which is a financial advisory firm based in New York, offices in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Denver. And we do middle market deals. We advise, me personally, technology deals between, call it 20 and 250 million in enterprise value.
Great. How did you get into this space? I mean, what led you? It sounds like you went to business school. Did you have a grand plan to do this early on, or how did you end up here?
I did. I like the transactional nature of what I do. I like the relationship nature of what I do. So I like people. I wanted to be near tech, but I knew with just who my personality is, that just working for a tech company, I worked for Sun Microsystems, for example, one summer. And just the day in, day out wasn't really thrilling me versus being an investment banker, mergers and acquisitions. It's different set of skills. You're always meeting new people. When you do it in tech, you're always at the forefront of innovation, and that still fascinates you. So, and I love M&A. I love the legal parts of it. I love the analytical part. I love the negotiating part. So I love what I do.
Yeah, sounds like you landed in a good spot and are creating a pretty cool company that advises companies on this. But when you're looking at a startup, whether it's a tech, because you deal with tech like software companies and services, right? So you deal
Correct.
with both, and is it mostly enterprise technologies that you're enterprise technologies and enterprise technology services?
Yeah, and B2B applications. So yeah, no B2C, no apps, that sort of thing. It's true basic software, automation, business process management, running things efficiently through code.
Yeah. And you tend to, if I remember correctly, you tend to look for underserved niches or niches of technology that maybe are not being well captured in the market, or is that true?
Yeah, I think they're interesting, and we're not investors, but from the sell side, mergers and acquisition, you want companies where there will be an interest. And so those companies that will draw investor or acquisition interest serve verticals and customers that need what they do, right? So we loved GovTech, for example, starting probably 8 years ago. There was a big investment cycle, probably 15 to 20 years prior to that. And so there was a big transformation of new people coming in, people retiring, the new people coming in expecting that consumerization of Apple, Amazon, feel from a business app, and a big transformation as a result of investment and new startups and GovTech businesses that weren't 30 years old. So that's a great example. Supply chain's another great example. And vertical SaaS businesses, quite frankly, people that really, it's code and it's technology, but you're also solving a pain point because maybe you were in that industry. You've been in that industry for 15 or 20 years. The nuanced pain points, and you're solving a problem for those people.
Right. So if we had to summarize what you do, I mean, you're looking for, you essentially match buyers and sellers, right? I mean, you're
right.
trying to find the best buyer for a seller.
That's right. And often in the last 15 plus years, that buyer is private equity who's done some sort of a recap of some sort, a majority recap. The business owner takes money off the table, but then rolls a big chunk into the new business with private equity as a partner. That's been a very big trend over the last 15 to 20 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. It's very, very interesting business and so different from what I do. So I'm always fascinated by your guys' your business model and just what you do in general. But when you're looking at a tech company, whether it's a startup or it's high growth or it's been around for a long time, whatever it is, when you're looking at this startup or this potential seller, or someone looking for an investor, what makes these companies attractive from both an investor standpoint, but also from I also want to look at it from a CIO perspective or a tech buyer's perspective. If they're looking at a potential technology or a services firm, what are some of the criteria they should be looking at either as a buyer or potential investor in the company and or as a potential customer?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that not to take the romanticism out of it, but it all comes down to financials, right? I mean, if you are solving a problem and it's a really important problem and your customers want you to solve that problem for you and they will continue to pay you, this is for a software company, because they are getting that value, they might even continue to buy from you. What you're doing, the mission criticalness of what you're doing, will drive the value of your business, and it's reflected in your financials, right? I mean, it's the difference between a 10 million ARR with 500,000 in EBITDA and 10 million in ARR with 3.5 or 4 in EBITDA, right? There's a difference there because there's a price point. People are willing to pay up for something that you're fixing for them, versus maybe people don't value it as much, and it shows in revenue growth, or it shows in pricing power or lack thereof, and therefore maybe a reduced or diminished EBITDA margin. So I hate to just bottom line it with financials, but we're big fans of. So there was a company called 3PL Central in Manhattan Beach, and that founder worked in the 3PL world, so warehousing other people's products and delivering and that sort of thing. Right. And that founder grew up in that business and decided there's a better way. The technology that's available to me now could be improved this way, this way, this way. Why doesn't this talk to this? Why, that kind of vertical know-how. And the value of that company, I think, is that he solved those pain problems with technology, right? So that's a big value driver. Are people downselling you, killing seats? Is it a nice to have versus a must have? The software and we certainly saw it in that slight blip during COVID, but then, as technology valuations came down with interest rates going up, we saw people turning things off or people keeping status quo. And that was a direct reflection of how mission critical are you to the business operations of the customers.
Right. Are you seeing a lot with AI? I mean, are you investing either in standalone AI services and tech companies and or other providers that are heavily invested in AI?
At this point in the middle market, right, most of our B2B application software companies are using AI just to improve what they have, versus brand new startup, we're on AI only, we're going to help AI people, or that. So we're less in the cutting edge, the people selling, I guess, the hammers and the things like that, the infrastructure for AI, and more, we're asking all of our clients, how are you using it? What is it doing? How is it fixing things? How is it speeding things along? And the people that are using it efficiently for little pieces, right? Little, like maybe it would replace an API for an integration. Just you're talking to AI and having that connection happen. So little pieces, but not wholehearted code, at least not yet in our clients.
What are some of the key signals that you look for when you're looking at or assessing a company? What are the key signals that they're ready for some sort of either acquisition or big investment? What do they need to be ready?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I guess there are a number of criteria to do that. The first is just, what is the goal of whatever activity it is? Are you raising capital? Are you raising seed? Are you raising an A, a B? Are you doing a recap? Are you selling the company? So that's number one. What are you trying to do? We would always say, you've got a great product or a company that you've built, you're going out to market, you want as many people to look at it as possible, right? And so just because it's a funnel, the more people you talk to, hopefully you have alternatives at the end of your process, so that you can make and high valuation. So I think that's super important in terms of size, so that you can get enough people paying attention. So a $2 million ARR versus a 12, there's going to be a bigger buyer set for the bigger company.
Right.
And that probably spills into number two at 10 or 12 in ARR versus 2. You probably have a really good idea of the profitability picture, just because you've scaled to a certain point where you should, yes, you're investing heavily in sales and marketing and you're growing, but you should have an idea of kind of run rate EBITDA margin potential there versus the 2 million. It might be a little more difficult to ascertain. So profitability, that critical mission critical piece, you want to make sure that what I'm providing people is really important, because there are no dumb investors, there are no dumb buyers, right? If you're having a real hard time describing and conveying the value of your product to people and they're not buying it, an investor is going to figure that out, right? So
right.
But I think that's and then again, what is your ultimate goal? Some people want to take in capital because they have actual needs for capital, R&D, sales and marketing. Some people take in capital because the capital comes with human capital in terms of board members and access to operating partners. And, I'm talking about institutions that would invest. Because it can be lonely at the top, right? Building your business, as you know. It can be lonely without that sounding board. So some people like having professional investors who have seen a lot of businesses, seen a lot of business models, add that institutional knowledge to them. That's the access to something they wouldn't have before. So other people want to expand internationally or, want access to capital to grow faster. But again, you would know, and the entrepreneur always knows, right, when the time is right, I think. That just from a gut feel, not meaning, there dark clouds on the horizon, because again, there are no dumb investors or buyers. They're going to see the dark clouds too, but that kind of, hey, I've taken it really far, and we've been successful. I think we have something here, but you want to take it to the next stage. And maybe you recognize some limitations, right, of you and your team, and therefore a transaction, recap or a capital raise or a full sale changes things up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times people think of it as just, I've got this startup, I've got this high growth company, I want access to money, which obviously is an important consideration. But you had a really good point, which is when you have a more professionally when you have professional investors that are pretty cut and dry, I would imagine, in terms of either you're delivering the ROI they expect or you're not, it gives you a certain amount of sophistication, I would imagine, access to the sounding boards and the professionalism and that sort of thing that goes along with private equity or professional investors.
Right. Yeah. And I think don't quote me on that. Well, here I am on a podcast. I think
you are being quoted.
Vista Equity created kind of that playbook where if you work for one of their portfolio companies in HR, you tabbed HR and here are the systems we use. Here's the meeting frequency. Here's how we hire. Here's how we fire. It's all codified and professionalized for you. And that way, all of your portfolio companies are doing the same thing and they can talk to each other and problem solve with each other. And that I think it was Vista that pioneered that, but it's not for everybody, right? You have guardrails and you can't go outside. But boy, it's an efficient way to run a business and as private equity to invest a bunch of businesses, knowing you're using NetSuite because of this, and you're on, what have you. It just makes a lot of sense from a investor standpoint.
Yeah. That's super interesting. A couple of audience questions here or in comments. Duran on LinkedIn is joining from the Bahamas. Thanks for joining here today. Van on YouTube joining from, looks like the UK. Is that a UK flag? I should know this. I apologize to those that are that. I think that's a UK flag, but I'm not familiar with. Anyway, you tell me what country.
That's Australia.
Oh, is it Australia? Yeah, I can't read. Okay, well, if we're wrong, clearly I was wrong, but if we're still wrong, let me know. And then here's an interesting question from Brend on LinkedIn. And Brend says, what are some of the challenges or pitfalls when it comes to M&A with the aim of expanding into a new territory or trying to establish a foothold in a new growth market? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are pitfalls with M&A in general, but specifically here, trying to get into, it looks like geography. I'm not sure you would buy a product company buying a product in another geography. I'm not sure I see that too much unless somebody's buying in Australia to establish that beachhead. The difficulty with it is it's two different organizations, right? So this is more broadly with M&A. It's two different cultures, it's financials, it's technical, it's how do we do things, it's how do we praise our successes, how do we deal with our underperformers, all of that is so idiosyncratic to those two companies that you have your way in Denver, Colorado of doing things. And if you want to expand into Sydney, things are different there beyond just the geographies, right? So I would take a step back and just say what's really important in any M&A to make that work, whether it's for new products or new talent or geographies or is that integration piece, right? And making really sure. We sold a company, this is a long time ago, and I'm sorry, to EMC when it was still on its own. So, but they started their integration literally 30 to 45 days before close. And they did it with armies of people. And they primarily initially focused on HR and focused on the people, right? So day one at close, we can't have people worried about benefits and healthcare and reporting responsibilities and roles and org charts and sales comp and right, that kind of stuff, because whatever impacts the people it is the value of what you're buying, right? Especially in a tech company, whether it's services or software. So making that as seamless as possible to make sure that, there's a pregnant woman at the company we're buying who's due next month. Well, we need to make sure there's not disruption in her healthcare provider. And it's that kind of thing to make sure that not only is it the right thing to do, but it also ensures a pretty smooth transition for those first few months when things are different. And change is difficult, right, for everybody. And there will be change, but I think how you handle that integration and the people and reporting, right? Maybe you have two different sales forces. Maybe that Australian company also had people in the US because it was trying to expand. And now you've got some conflict with people calling on the same customers. And boy, addressing that as you are getting to close, if possible, makes all the sense in the world. Otherwise, you close and then it's this cold start of, well, we need to figure this out. And people begin to point fingers at people. Why did we do this? M&A is terrible. It just doesn't have to be that way. So I don't know if that answered your that question, but that's just generally how the pitfalls in M&A.
Yeah, regardless of,
I guess really quickly on technology too, really doing your work on what you're buying and really understand. If it's big enough, you probably have an outsourced, like a Cross-Lake technology or somebody doing, or somebody like you doing some tech diligence. But if it's not, and you're doing it yourself or your team, that adage that I love is plan the work and work the plan, right? And from that, I mean, here's what this product does. We need to assess this. This piece of code was written 7 years ago. We need to assess that and really plan it all out, and roles and responsibilities and communication among your team to make sure that through all your efforts, whether it's code reviews or a lot of interviews, you're kind of checking that box and getting to know everybody has technical debt, but you really ought to know with a pretty strong amount of certainty within 3 months of close what has to be done here, right? What needs to be rectified? What's on the project list? Otherwise, that's a huge problem of what you've bought, right? The other issue on integration and M&A for services companies, especially for services companies, is that culture, right? We used to often think that if you could put 2 or 3 smaller services companies together to make a big one, you'd have, back to what I said earlier, you'd have more interested parties, right? You're a bigger company, right? So if you're each 5 and 1, 5 revenue, 1 EBITDA, well, you're more attractive at 15 and 3 or 4 as a group, but you can't just combine those services cultures, as you know really well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a esprit de corps that you have built that if you tried to bring somebody else in, it's different. It's change, right? I mean, you probably have more to say about that than I do.
Yeah, and not only have we looked to potentially do that at third stage, we've looked at acquisitions, and we've been working with you about, kind of what our growth path forward looks like. But a lot of the consulting we do are larger organizations that have grown through mergers and acquisitions, and the culture piece is such a big barrier and pitfall for a lot of organizations. And that sort of leads to this really interesting question that I'm sure you've never seen this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. It's from Darian on LinkedIn, and I'm being facetious here. I imagine you have seen this, but Darian on LinkedIn asks, have you seen situations where a founder took capital for the right reason, but ended up with the wrong partner? Whether it's cultural difference or just some other difference that didn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure, right. And a big piece of how we see our job as financial advisors is, and M&A professionals, is to provide alternatives. But you go through this big process of marketing and talking to people and running your process. And a big piece of that is meeting a lot of these people. So you've boiled the ocean, you've come down to 8 to 10 parties to spend a couple of weeks with, to maybe have dinner, or at a minimum have a 4 or 5 hour management presentation where you're talking to these investors and getting to understand what they think about what you've built, but also how, if they were your investor, how would the future go? Where would they put their money? Where do they see the value? How are we going to do this together? So part of our job is to force that socialization, and have our clients better understand each investor and what they think. The difficulty is everybody's on their best behavior during these.
Mm.
So nobody's going to show ugliness, and there is ugliness, right?
Right.
One of the questions we suggest our clients use with private equity in particular is, I'd love to talk to a number of your current portfolio company CEOs. One of the questions they're going to ask is, how is this board member when things don't go well? Right? Hey, we missed this, or this hire didn't come, or some sort of bad news. Are they problem solving, or are they finger pointing? Right? And so that's, but I have seen it, back to the question, where, hey, we're doing this for the right reason, and oftentimes that is, I want to do a recap. I want to put some money in the bank to just protect my retirement, my kids, and operate a bit more loosely. I want that partner to help grow this business. I'm going to roll 20% into it, and we think this is great. But sometimes those partners change. Sometimes those that board, or that director that was on your board that led your deal, might get pulled away on something else, and you get somebody else on your deal. And but it's change. And yes, things can happen. There can be, generally, as you're meeting these partners, you're very candid about, here's the growth, this is the opportunity, this is what we're doing. So most people understand that. But even post-close, there's still some changes that they've been thinking of that they want to run by you. And if they own the majority of the business, those changes are happening. And you just have to trust that they're well vetted and analyzed, and they're not just whim or ego driven. They want to build value, obviously. So, but that involves change to what you've built.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what, you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, or we've touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the common challenges, or the most common challenges you've seen during post-acquisition integration? I know a lot of what you're doing is obviously pre-acquisition. You're leading companies to an acquisition or an investment, but when that investment happens, and then you've got the buyer in place, or it's a merger and you've got the combined entity in place, what are some of the common pitfalls you see in those situations?
I really easy. It's just change, right? So change is different. It's depending on, were you a founder, owner, operator doing your own thing, and then you did a recap with private equity? Because a lot of that transformation is accountability, and now I have a board, and now people are asking for things that I'm having to spend my time to produce rather than build the business, which is what I was doing as a founder owner. So there can be frustration there. There can be, I mean, this is a cold capitalist thing to say, but there can be in some businesses, people or favored people who maybe underperform, but everybody likes them and they stay, and, they do a pretty good job. But, somebody who's invested in that business doesn't necessarily have the patience for, oh yeah, they're late again, but that's what happens. Or, oh yeah, they said this deal would close, but it got pushed. And, typically that kind of, where you just let that happen. There's accountability now, right? There are quarterly board meetings with people who aren't terrible people, but they want to know more about the business, and they want to understand why we're doing certain things, and performance, and new hires, and new products, and capital expenditures. And, they ask questions, and you didn't used to have that when you were running it by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are changes. It's interesting, and I don't think this is ugly, but a lot of times what we see is private equity tinkering with pricing models. How are you pricing? I also think as a business owner, you're a little reticent to push through COLAs, even if you can, and just raise prices throughout. I think a lot of business owners just kind of keep it steady Eddie, and which is fine. But when you get that new outside perspective with a recap with a private equity shop, oftentimes their price increases. Maybe there's price and support, or product and support mixes and goal, better, best type pricing, and tinkering with that kind of thing to really improve the business. That's something you may not have considered as a business owner,
Right.
or thought possible. And so that's good value. But yeah, the pitfalls are, it's cultural, it's change for people. Everybody wants a good exit, right? I mean, we had a client in Augusta, Georgia, and he wanted to sell his business and give the keys to a strategic, 100%, I'm out. And we ran that process. So go out to a couple hundred people, run the full process. And at the end of the day, he went the private equity recap route because he liked the people. He could see that they were super intelligent and really understood the industry that he competed in and could be value add. And he wasn't totally ready to quit. And he learned that through the process. And so he did the recap and rolled probably 20 or 25% and was the CEO for that next iteration for like 9 months.
Right.
Because he and the private equity group came to each other and said, hey, we need more out of you. We understand why you don't, you're independently wealthy over here. We just made you independently wealthy with the recap. But don't you think so you're the CEO and founder, but you're also an investor in this business. So with your investor hat on, don't you want somebody in the CEO seat with this new energy and this drive, and maybe has options, and they're hungry and they want to grow? And Joe, to his credit, said, absolutely. Right. So I'll step back. I'll be an executive chairman. I'll be, advisor. I'm available. But yeah, that 20-25% that I rolled, I want to make 3 or 4 times my money on it. And that's often what happens. Right. But he had the I don't know what the humility, I guess, to recognize, hey, I get it. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing and I hate it because it's wrong. But I see what you're doing, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I don't have it in me to be your guy. So let's get somebody in there.
Yeah. Really interesting. Here's an interesting question, and we'll see if you can answer this, Adam. I think this is a really interesting question. This is from Duran on LinkedIn. Duran says, how would you structure SaaS product expansion into multiple countries and break into those markets with the ultimate goal of an exit? Would it make sense to create offices that are directly managed in each country, or utilize integration or white label partners to remit license fees to us? Do you have a preference there as far as like what would increase the valuation or be most attractive to a potential buyer or investor?
Create offices that are directly Wow. So yeah, and that starts to dip more into operations. Yeah. Frankly.
I guess the question, can I rephrase the question? How about this? If I've got a software company and I know, like, for example, Western Europe, I know that Western Europe, I think there's going to be a lot of demand there. Would it be more appealing to you as a broker, someone who's finding a potential investor? Would it be more appealing to you to see us open new offices that might increase our fixed cost? Or would it be more appropriate to have partners that maybe are lower risk, but you don't control it as much, but you're taking a cut of what they sell? Or I'm just thinking out loud here, but I don't know if you have a strong knee-jerk reaction of what investors or potential buyers might be most attracted by, or would they say, just leave it alone, just stay domestic, and then we'll invest in you and then we'll help you expand?
It's the latter, right? I would think. I mean, I'm just trying to think. So we sold a travel tech company a couple of years ago, and the way they expanded into Europe, really Western Europe, was I think he had worked with our company and then moved over there and wanted on the sales front to be able to gin up some deals and be the representative there. And that worked pretty well. But when we sold the business, the new buyer bought out that salesperson and shut that down, because I think their thinking was, we don't want the one person just kind of knocking on doors and kicking things around over here. If we're going to be there, let's be there, right, in a demonstrable way with an office and people, and let's actually be there. So I know they changed that. I've seen, we sold a services company a long time ago. He was big in London, but again, it was people who he knew and trusted to move over there, and they knew the culture, and they know, here's what we push, and this is how the value we deliver. And so it was less about that partner. I mean, you probably have a better sense about partnership in EMEA, or expansion through that way, right?
Yeah. I'm here with Adam Haynes. We're talking about mergers and acquisitions in the tech space. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 219. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. So we're here with Adam Haynes. We're talking about tech startups and mergers and acquisitions in the tech space. We've done it both ways. I mean, in Asia Pacific, we have a local partner that has equity in the entity, but it's someone that's pretty tightly affiliated with us. We own a majority stake, but we have someone who's an equity partner that's based in Asia Pacific. But for EMEA, for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, we have someone that's on our payroll. That we've hired to kind of open up that office. So we have both models. Honestly, the jury's still out. The verdict is still out on which one is going to be the better model. But we've tried them both for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's back to when you laid out, is it this or this? It really is from an investor's standpoint. I think they would rather see you totally, just because we're in the States, North America focused, and let them help you go somewhere else, because chances are there's a lot in North America that's untapped growth-wise,
right?
An addressable market and obtainable addressable market. So rather than somebody who's in North America who also has an office in Toronto, and they're these little bits. Because then that investor probably has to decide, or okay, are we really going heavy into these other areas, or can we really just go, gangbusters in North America?
Right.
I think it's a little more difficult, unless you're really big. I guess that's the other thing. See, my lens is the lower middle market. So a lot of founder, owner, operators who grow to 10 million in ARR have never thought, oh, I should be in Chile. I should be in Australia. Right. So I imagine if you are a couple 100 million in ARR, you bet you are starting to expand. That's probably just beyond my pay grade, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. Is the economy, particularly here in the U.S. or even just globally, when you look at rising interest rates or interest rates that are hit higher than they had been in recent years? You've got interest rates, geopolitical stuff, tariffs, trade wars. Any of that stuff affecting the M&A market right now, or what are you seeing in the overall, kind of investor appetite for putting their money somewhere right now?
Right now is unprecedented. So the easier explanation is when interest rates were cut, things were crazy in 2021, 22, because the economy was so crazy and there was so much capital, and people were upgrading software and investing in new point of sale and doing this and automating this. And then when rates started to come up, that really slowed down. It slowed down the economy. And people started to kind of make do with what they had. So the capital expansion and, that really slowed down. And so the M&A markets were no different in tech, right? Crazy for a bit. And then just the worst we've seen for a couple of years now. This year, so that's that chapter. This year is it's on a daily basis, right? You don't know what's happening. So we're all trying to live with uncertainty. And try to see if we can go back to doing deals, which I think we can, even in this really uncertain world, right? I mean, and so the classic example, so we sold a dealer management software company, so that's to auto dealers. If we had that client today and the tariffs may impact automakers, may not, we're not quite sure. Are we going to fix that? Is it 90-day moratorium? There's that uncertainty. And so if my software client needs growth and expansion among their clients, customers, but their customers are kind of hiding, right, waiting to see what's happening, and certainly not making big capital or investment decisions, then that can slow things down, right? So I think the tariff thing is disruptive, and it is slowing things down. But I also think we've been through the first quarter now, and now we're into April with the crazy tariffs going on, and people are realizing, okay, the status quo is going to be uncertainty. And if we're touched by some of this tariff thing, then we'll make that decision. But if we're not going to use the tariffs as an excuse not to go run a process. If our business is good and it's growing, meaning it's growing because our end customers seem to still be buying from us, and our pipeline is growing and our profitability is good, well, you should go do a deal. Right now in the tech M&A markets, it's that barbell distribution. So the A+ companies are getting the double-digit ARR type multiples. And then the guys at the other end are really busy, but getting kind of the 2018, 2019 multiples. And there aren't a lot in between. So the B+ businesses, and this goes for the last couple of years. So I do think that more of those B+, A- businesses are starting to go, because we've all waited for 2.5 years, right? They started to raise in the summer of 22. And that's really when the brakes hit. And 23 was super quiet, and 24 was super quiet until the end when rates started to be cut. And now we've run into this new wall. So, but again, back to that mission criticalness of your solution. If it is, so again, back to GovTech. GovTech seems to be one of those areas that's still doing pretty well, because there is that reinvestment phase going on right now. And there are a lot of interesting companies with new technologies that are replacing old monolithic, terrible systems. So GovTech, there's still investment there. And there are areas, supply chain, there's still a lot of activity in supply chain and improving logistics and things like that.
Yeah, and I imagine with trade wars and geopolitical stuff happening throughout the world, that supply chain management software is going to be in high demand for years to come. I would suspect as these disruptions happen or continue in global supply chains, it just means that there's more opportunity for automation and technology to help solve the problems. I would imagine.
Yeah. That's and the other one last piece here. The bright spot since the Great Resignation has been services. Services broadly defined: business services, janitorial services, HVAC, GCs, plumbers, healthcare services, tech-enabled business services, IT consulting. And I think we might be in that period where people, if something is a little broken and underperforming software-wise, maybe we're not pulling it out and replacing it with a new product, but maybe we're getting services people to come in and do what we're trying to do, right? It's kind of that new coat of paint feel, where I think people can come in and say, okay, you want this to talk to this. Okay, great. Your portal to your healthcare patients is a little outdated. We can clean that up. That's important. And add functionality that automates things so they're not calling in, so it reduces your call center. That kind of activity is still going on. Because technology is a vital piece of every organization, period.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point or question that jogs that's triggered in my head is, when you're looking at buyers and you're bringing buyers to the table, is there a strong preference towards sort of the recurring revenue model of a SaaS technology provider versus a services provider that doesn't necessarily have that sort of lock-in predictable revenue?
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely different. I mean, services businesses generally trade on EBITDA because they're not growing 40%. It would be pretty difficult. And they're nice and profitable. When we have a service, so we closed a company's called 40AU in Nashville, outsourced software development shop. That we closed a recap with private equity shop in Atlanta back in November. And that is a fast growing, nicely profitable business that doesn't have contracted recurring, typical SaaS type revenue. But we built the story of, hey, this is how we've grown and this is how we can replicate how we've grown. And the land and expand, right? We got into this hospital system, and then got to know this person, and that's what we've done. And by the way, here are 5 case studies of how we've done that. We've mastered that, and so I think that's a pretty attractive where you take services and show them as reoccurring, right? With you create relationships. Maybe you've done a bunch with a Toyota plant, and there are 15 other Toyota plants, and it's just a matter of time before you help, roll something out. Or so we look at the recurring and the expansion, right? How else can you grow? But yeah, you're not a software company that's growing 40% is going to get a revenue multiple, and also the value that you're providing. So back to your profitability, a services company that's 10 million. And 1 million and growing 5% a year, right? That depending on what they're doing, that could be 6 to 8 times EBITDA. If they're growing 25% a year, or they're 25 or 30% EBITDA margin, there's something special about that business model. You're going to be looking at 8 to 10. And then if you add a vertical that you're really good in, you're really good in energy or hospital, or, you've really refined and have a stranglehold on that industry from a services perspective, maybe you're 10 to 12 times, right? And then if you add any recurring into there, you might get a little boost from that as well. But those services businesses were trading at crazy multiples coming out of COVID, and they've come down a bit. And again, not unlike the software companies, how are your customers performing? Right? Are they going to cut back? So it is a repaint kind of economy, but are they going to cut all projects, right? As in for cost cutting and battening up the hatches and that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's just so much whenever there's uncertainty, and there's competition for those investment dollars, like now we hear a lot of clients that are saying, well, we're going to kind of hold off and see, or we're real slow making a decision on whether or not we want to move forward with a big technology initiatives because we're not sure how tariffs are going to affect us, for the North American clients we work with, just as one example. But anytime there's uncertainty like that, it seems like that creates, that can disrupt, the predictability of some of these revenue models, especially on the services side.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, real interesting. Now, I know this is a little bit outside of what you normally do. I mean, you're not dealing with CIOs and CFOs at companies that are buyers of enterprise tech in the same way we do. But if you were a CIO or a CFO at, say, a big, manufacturing company, a global manufacturing company, you were looking at investing in or partnering with a potential technology or a technology services provider that wasn't one of those big names that everyone knows and everyone feels kind of comfortable with. Because there are a lot of upstarts, a lot of startups, a lot of high growth companies on the services and the software side. What are some of the things you'd be looking at in terms of viability and just the overall health of an organization, not from an investor perspective, but more from a potential customer perspective?
Okay. I think it's always the case study reference, right? Talking to people who've worked with that person I'm considering coming in and doing a project or buy, right? I think you have to talk to people about their experience, because you're right, the brand names get in generally because of the brand name, but can also fail, right, on implementation and delivery of what they, doing what they said they would do. So no, I would talk to other people. It's hard for a startup in that, infancy of 1, 2, 3 million in revenue, services wise, to kind of continue to grow because people can be concerned. Are you going to be here tomorrow? Are you hiring? Are you firing? Are you retaining people? What's the culture, right? Are you around? Right. And I think that's going to be really important. And then I imagine, you tell me, but your bill rates and who's the team. I mean, I imagine it comes down to who are those people that I'm going to be working with on a daily basis.
Yeah, cultural fit. Does it fit our team? Is it someone that has the right balance of flexibility versus repeatable standard processes and approaches?
Right.
And then on the software side too, there's something to be said for working with a smaller and scrappier, hungrier software company versus one of the big guys that own or control all the leverage in the relationship. If you've got, we work with a couple partners of ours, because we're moving down that path of tech enabled services, and we partner with and we license technology from different providers. And some of these smaller ones they're scrappy. I mean, they want to work with you. They're hungry. And there's something to be said for that versus like if we were to go work with you mentioned NetSuite or, looking at Oracle or an SAP, they probably don't give a crap if you are concerned about the T's and C's in their contract. That's not, that's our problem, not theirs, and so, but working with a smaller company, it's not just about leverage, but it's also just about who's going to give you the attention you need. And are you going to be important to that, or how important are you going to be to that potential partner? So I think those are all good points that you make there. What about for investors and founders that are running either a technology, software, or services company? What are some of the realistic expectations you could set for us around valuations and exits in this current climate? So if we want to go out and find a buyer or investor right now, where do you see expectations being off base most often? I guess maybe is a good way to put it. What are some of the expectation setting things you might suggest to us here today?
Yeah. So the first comment I would make is that the interesting dichotomy of the last 2.5 years being really slow and is that private equity still and VC has a lot of money, right? The dry powder that we all talk about. And is desperate for deals. What's interesting is that a lot of private equity and tech M&A did deals from 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22 at some pretty big multiples, and now have holding in a business that's probably worth less than what they paid for it. So they don't want to transact. At the same time, you have limited partners who are in your funds there that want you to sell those businesses so that they can get capital to commit to your new fund, which is investing at a much lower valuation, right, environment.
Right.
So private equity, a lot of the last few years deals have been private equity to private equity, no banker involved, no auction process, just these two people know each other. Maybe they competed for an asset, somebody lost, somebody owns it, now goes to that person and says, hey, I'd like to get some liquidity to my limited partners. And so I know you like this business. Do you want to buy 40 or 50% of it? And I'll still keep a meaningful role, but that'll get me some capital to people. So deals are still happening. And investors really want to look at deals. I think if you put your investor hat on in an environment like this, you want to do deals, but you really want to reduce your risk. Right? Because nobody wants to do a deal in a weird topsy-turvy market and have it not work out well, because it's really easy to say, what were you thinking? Right.
Right.
I mean, Trump, tariffs, right. So investors are a strong kind of risk off mentality right now, but they want to do deals. And that's why those A+ deals, right, that are super clean, that are growing, that are profitable, you feel more comfortable, and you have to overpay, quite frankly. I mean, those are, double-digit revenue ARR type multiples.
Right.
So that's the environment that we're in. If you're, again, because there has been this dearth of B+, A-, kind of that middle chunk companies coming to market, I do think we're going to see more of those, and I think that will jumpstart some M&A as well. So multiples wise, it's like I said, if it's services, it's an EBITDA multiple. If it's a product, it's based on revenue generally, unless you're only growing 5 or 10%, in which case people will look at your profitability because it's just an investment for cash flow at that point versus the meteoric growth. So, but look, if you had a neighbor that sold their business in 2021 or 22, I would stop talking to them, over beers about the multiple that they got. That nobody gave their business away, right? That's the other story. Anytime you hear from it, it was this incredible multiple and easy, and they loved my business. And those multiples are going to be hard to come by, quite frankly. I mean, selling the 5 to 10 ARR business at a 10 to 12 multiple doesn't happen anymore, right? I mean, it just doesn't. So, but everything is kind of shifted down. But you know what? When I say we're back to the 2018, 2019 multiples, those were fantastic multiples.
Right. It's just all relative. Right.
It's so unfair to shake a stick pre-COVID, because they were really, they were 15 to 25 times EBITDA type multiples for software companies, right? And 8 to 10 times revenue. So I think with perspective, it's still the higher valuations in general, industry-wise, go to tech companies. Right. And people can take comfort in that. And they're valuable businesses for a lot of key reasons. So did that answer it? I mean, I think it's still a good time to go out there. I think if you are small or not profitable or not growing, it's a really rough market out there to try and get a deal done. Buyers are afraid of doing things. A lot of buyers have moved up. They don't want to see smaller deals. It's rough out there. Again, that's a risky asset, and this is not a risk on kind of environment.
Right. They're a little more risk adverse right now
That's
as investors. Right. It's funny that you're talking about the good old days of 2021 and 2022. That shows you how fast this is all changing, right? And how fast it could change back to the days of 2018 and 19.
Right. That's right.
I want to get to this really interesting question on LinkedIn. This is from Jeremy on LinkedIn. Jeremy says, how do you assess the ability of a target investment company to flex, change, or pivot to market changes? Is that a metric that influences the multiple? So in other words, maybe the overall agility and ability to change and adapt. Is that something that buyers look at, or that you look at, as far as, especially in uncertain markets and uncertain times like we're in right now? I would imagine there's some value in that, in terms of a company's ability to pivot and change course based on what's happening in the world. First of all, is that important? Second of all, if it is, how do you buyers, or do they value that in some tangible way.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, so working backward, I would think they would value that because, again, it'll come out in the financials, right? You're able to pivot like that to avoid something or take advantage of something, or it should be reflected in the profitability or the revenue growth, or so I'm not sure they ascribe a certain piece to that, a multiple, a half turn multiple to that, but I do think it comes out. I think the other thing that they would probably ask is, it's great to pivot, but how expensive is it, and what are you doing in that pivot? And it's hard because we're kind of shadow boxing in the hypothetical, but
right.
As long as there's not a big capital investment to move over here, again, because things change daily, right? You need to be careful about what kind of commitment, what that flex, change, pivot is, and what's involved, because things could change, right? It's a mercurial administration at the moment. And so as long as there's not a big capital investment involved in that pivot, being able to move like that, to me, being able to pivot like that is a sign of a good business owner, right? We talked when the interest rates just started to go up and things slowed down, the whole idea of business unit economics, right? We were all just growing at all costs, but did people understand when we sold a unit of something? Did we make money? Or
right?
So it's the same thing here, right? It's just good business to be able to do the analysis and do the work and be able to pivot and illustrate that to an investor.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, and that's I would imagine in today's day and age that's more important than ever. But anytime really, because like you said, you talk about risk. Investor is not real, or investors in general are not real interested in risky assets or risky investments right now. So I imagine that's one of those things that could help make a target more appealing, is if they can adjust and they can mitigate some of that risk of uncertainty by being able to adapt faster than other companies that are out there potentially.
Yeah. That's the other thing for your audience, as if they're considering selling, or, and it's very hard to do, but get outside of the business and try to look at it objectively, which again, really hard to do. But try to look at your business from the outside to try to determine what's an outsider going to see, right? Yeah. Are they going to see, we often use this one, are they going to see, because you're at 7 million in ARR, your salesperson is one person who, she's wicked talented and drives everything, and that's awesome. Of course it's awesome it got you to 7 in ARR, but is an investor going to look at that and say, well, what if she leaves? Number one. Number two, are we building this for the future? Do we have systems? Are we recruiting? Are we training? Are we promoting? Right? Or is somebody going to look at that and say, what you thought was a huge advantage is actually potentially an area of concern, right? Because so being able to look at, how do we keep our books? Are we cash? Well, people want accrual accounting, right? So you ought to look at that and figure that out, because if you're a business like a lot of software businesses that get a bunch of deferred revenue upfront cash wise, it'll give you that inflated, wow, look at the balance sheet. But that's not accrual.
Right.
Right. So you live by it cash wise, which is great, but you need to see that nice recurring revenue deferred trickle down over time. That's the beauty of your business. Frankly, you should track it that way. So, yeah. And I think the other thing, back to SaaS or on the services side, utilization and bill rates. And a lot of people just kind of assume they're at certain rates, right? Oh, we're 110 net dollar retention, or we're 95 gross, because that's what they've been told. But somebody needs to do that. The buyers are going to do that analysis. They're going to get the core data. They're going to analyze it. They're going to come up with a number, and it better match, right? Or you've just been kind of living this, not lie, but telling yourself it's 110 when it's really 97 is different, right? And you should, if you take that step outside your business and look at it, is pipeline growing? Are we building backlog? Investors aren't stupid. They're going to look at all this stuff too. And maybe there's some things you can change. Maybe bill rates have been flat for a quarter over quarter, and you need to start changing some things. And so anyway, that was a tangent, but that's just for what people might do if they're thinking about a deal.
Yeah. Well, speaking of thinking about doing deals and getting your crystal ball out and predicting the future, if we're to look ahead 3 to 5 years, what are some of the biggest shifts you expect to see in the tech startup and the overall merger and acquisition ecosystem? How do you think this is all going to unfold here in the next 3 or 5 years?
Boy, that's a tough one too.
General trends, or I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like every time I talk to you, it seems like the landscape has changed for better or for worse pretty significantly. I mean, it seems like there's sort of tectonic shifts in the market that, some are anticipated, some aren't. Things like interest rates. It seems like you can kind of see that coming when
Right.
interest rates affect, people's willingness to invest or not. But then there's other things like tariffs that you may not have expected to happen the way it did, and or impact the M&A market the way it did. But I mean, just based on what you're seeing, feeling, hearing, what historically, what do you think is going to happen? Just at a high level, what trends can we expect in the next few years?
Yeah, it's interesting to think, given how crazy it is tariffs wise and interest rates and Jerome Powell and Trump. And I actually think the reason I'm having a difficult time laying out 3 to 5 years from now is AI, right? And the impact that AI has on everything. But, and it's positive and negative, right? So AI on services. So for outsourced software developers, maybe that first pass of code can be AI'd, right? So we don't need those people. Well, what does that do to our promotion of people within our industry, right? So it's good because you're reducing costs, but then how does that influence my business and how I grow the business? Because I need people who have done it, who have evolved through the ranks to lead the junior people. Well, if I replace those junior people, how do I grow that business? AI in software companies. I mean, I don't think we ever get to this point, but are you going to be able to just go to AI and say, hey, I've got this warehouse management company or implementation, and I want this data and this data and this data to be pulled out every month and uploaded into this KPI report. And does it do that? Right. And are people comfortable that a machine has created that function and that it's going to do it correctly? And, has it been done properly? And so I think AI is just a really interesting impact. It does feel like it reduces jobs. I think people can use advanced AI, the Copilot, the where you're paying for it, not just Chat GPT. Right. To run marketing campaigns and come up with its own cadence of pinging certain people. Maybe it can also go out and find people that you hadn't found and their emails and is just marketing your product to them, and maybe they buy your product. And, that's a pretty wild scenario. But I think that could happen. So that makes me a little nervous. It's hard to tell. I think technology and automation, there's still a lot of things that need to be automated. Right. So in that gives me optimism that there are still pain points. There are still inefficient ways of doing things. There are business processes that people have just grown used to and accustomed to, even though they're terrible, that can be fixed. So I'm still an optimist from a technology standpoint. I just think it will be produced and delivered in ways that we might not fully understand today. Right. That it's just because AI is so exponent. It's like who was the Intel chairman? Was it Grove?
Andrew.
Or no, it was Moore, Gordon Moore. The Moore's law, right? The exponential increase of computing power. The AI is that on steroids, right? I mean, it's really wild to see. So I think interest rate. A lot of the world is capitalist, and people want things to calm down and get back to doing deals and low rates and expansion and growth. And if we all need that, I think generally that works over the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to have some speed bumps, obviously. But no, it's AI that's still, I don't fully understand the impact on my client base. And I don't think my clients understand it yet. Everyone's dipping a toe and using it in certain ways.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, you tell me, what do you think about the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, as far as technology in general, I mean, I couldn't necessarily speak to the M&A space and how investments will pan out, but just in general, I think AI is creating uncertainty. Like you said, there's just so much uncertainty of what it means. How is it going to affect our business? And we're seeing more and more clients that are saying, hey, can you help us define an AI strategy, and define a roadmap for how we might deploy it. In fact, I'll give you a shameless plug here for the audience. If you're interested in our guide to AI strategy and implementation, I've put up a QR code here on the top left of your screen. You can download that. It has a lot of trends in the AI space that you can learn from. We also talk about how to define a strategy and a roadmap for your usage of AI. But I'll leave that up for the audience to scan. But in the meantime, to answer your question, I think that organizations are, what we advise our clients to do is sort of take a step back. Don't ignore AI by any means. I mean, use AI selectively and where there's high value opportunities to use it, but don't feel like you have to go all in on AI right now and have it maybe under invest in other areas that you should be investing in. For example, a lot of companies have crappy old legacy systems with crappy data, and so if you're going to be using AI at some point in the future, which we all will be, if you're not already, you will be at some point soon, you can start cleaning up your data. You can start getting your back office systems in place, or get your ducks in a row to where you can start using AI if and when the time comes where there's the maturity or the understanding of how you're going to use it. So that's generally speaking, I think, where we're headed. And I think a lot of organizations still have to run their business. They still have to automate. They still have to invest in technology. They still have to keep up with, the whole SaaS and cloud movement. So many clients are still on-prem. They still haven't shifted to the cloud. So forget AI for a minute. They can't even, get their old AS400 or iSeries system out of the way to be able to move to a more modern technology. So there's a lot of stuff you can be doing and should be doing in the meantime, even if you don't want to be on the bleeding edge of technology, which most of our clients don't want to be. I mean, most of our clients are pretty, risk adverse, third generation family owned businesses or high growth PE owned firms that aren't necessarily looking to, change the world with AI per se. They're looking to produce a better widget, or, they're looking to scale their operations or whatever. All right. Thank you, Adam. Great conversation. And thank you to the audience for the really good questions. We got a ton of great questions there. A lot of them we didn't answer or get to, but we've got a lot more we want to cover and dive into as it relates to that conversation. We also want to get into our case study to talk about one of our more successful ERP implementation clients. We'll talk about what made them successful, what was different about their implementation. We'll get into all that here in just a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'll give you anything to feel it coming. Do you wake up on your own?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
And I'll do anything you ever dreamed to be complete. Little pieces of nothing that fall.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 219. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Via Kuski. And Darian, we just had Adam on the show. We chatted about tech startups, mergers and acquisitions, what you should look for if you're investing in technology or if you're looking to acquire or partner with a technology provider. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I thought it was a great conversation. He made a lot of great points. There's a few different topics I guess I kind of want to dive into with you as kind of a follow-up. One being, you guys talked about how hard it is for founders who've operated independently to suddenly answer to a board, kind of shifting from business, from building the business to producing reports and justifying decisions. How can founders prepare before they do a recap to avoid burnout or misalignment? And how do the best founders know when it's time to step back or even hand off like the CEO role altogether?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. It's something I struggle with as a founder and CEO. I mean, I fully acknowledge that someday I might get fired from this company. I think about that sometimes about how, in order to build a real sustainable company long term, it has to outlive the founder, not just in terms of its growth and not being so dependent on the founder, but also, most founders don't last the entire duration of a company's life cycle. I think it's easy to look at people like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, sort of those once in a generation anomaly type people that were able, like Mark Zuckerberg's a great example. You look at him, he was a kid in college, in a dorm room, started Facebook, and it took off. And, fast forward 20 years and he's the CEO of this big, massive organization. He's still running it. Now he's got professionals around him. He's not the sole decision maker and the sole owner like he once was, but he has investors, he has a board of directors and, governance around what he can and can't do. But it's extremely rare for someone like him, especially at his age. He doesn't have any real world experience outside of starting Facebook, which, I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that by any means. I mean, he's a very talented person, obviously, but it's pretty rare to see something like that. And most founders don't last that long. So yeah, I think you have to set aside those anomalies and not, I think Adam used the word romanticize. It's easy to romanticize the founder's journey and say, the founder is going to be there forever. And they're going to be able to take it to, be $100 billion someday. And some of you, maybe that's true, but most of it's not true. So I think, I think that's what you have to look at too, is just, recognize your own strengths and weaknesses as a founder or leader in general. And it's not just for founders, it's for any sort of leader, business executive or management type person. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting to think about for sure. And I think Adam obviously made some great points about it as well. Another thing you guys touched on was global expansion and how in some cases investors prefer to wait and expand after the deal rather than seeing a scattered international footprint up front. From your experience, is a partner-led expansion seen as more flexible and lower risk, or does having owned offices still give a stronger signal to buyers? I know that might be a little bit technical, but just seeing what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed to have a pretty strong opinion on that in terms of it being a situation where, focusing domestically and really, maximizing what you can get out of your own domestic market is where the value is. And then you can use investor money and focus to then go internationally once you've got a real strong foothold. I'd say in hindsight, for me personally at third stage, in hindsight, that's probably something that we did prematurely, was enter the international space. We had a couple and still have a couple of really close partners that we work with in both segments. And that was part of what led us to go a little bit earlier than we might have otherwise. It's not something we would have done if we didn't have these people that we knew that were aligned with us philosophically and everything. But still, having said that, I mean, in hindsight, we probably could have focused more on North America first and then gone to the international. But the problem is we had so many international clients, there was multinational operations. And so we saw value early on in having an international footprint. So I know we struggle with that. I struggle with that. But so it's interesting to hear his perspective. I think when it comes to technology though, so we're services. And so there is value in us being distributed geographically. But if you're a software company, I mean, you can set up sales outposts or you have affiliates that are marketing for you internationally without you necessarily having to invest in opening a new office or, formally setting up an international branch. You can grow other ways internationally without that. So I think if you're a software company, a product company, it's maybe a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question. I feel like one message that Adam made very clear was that buyers still want to do deals, but they're just scrutinizing everything harder and playing more defense. So Eric, in your opinion, I kind of want to get your take on this. If a CEO is thinking or wanting to raise capital or exit in the next 6 to 12 months, what do you think they should be brutally honest about in their business before they go to market?
Couple things. One is, are you profitable and do you meet the financial metrics that he outlined? And it didn't really come through in this conversation to the extent that I've seen it just from having, happy hours and lunches with Adam over the years. He's someone that's been kind of an informal advisor to me for over a decade now. And he's someone that, we'll use, when the time is right, which is probably soon. When the time is right for us to find outside investment, he'll be the one that we use for that. But so I've picked his brain a lot over the years around that. And I think, the fact that you have to hit these certain minimum metrics is really important because, you may think you have something really special and you may indeed have something special that you've built that's unique. And there's some intangible secret sauce to it, all that good stuff. But it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, none of that matters if the investors can't look at the surface and see some sort of financial results that is appealing to them. So I think that's something that's become real clear from my conversations with him is because he's challenged us. He said to us, like, look, you're good in these areas, but here's a couple metrics where you could be doing better. And it's if you don't fix that stuff and optimize those measures, you're just not going to get the same pool of interested buyers. And if you don't have the same pool of interested buyers, you're not going to get as much valuation for it because there's not as many buyers and there's not as many people to compete with each other to get a piece of your company. So I think that's what you have to be realistic about. I think you also have to be realistic about the fact that you can't go from, being a total gunslinging mom and pop, founder led company to and then get outside investment and expect that to stay the same. It's going to change to where it becomes more formalized in terms of governance and decision making and accountability, expectations, and all that stuff. And a lot of founders, I think, want more of a lifestyle business. They want to run the business and do whatever they want, make good money, and be comfortable. But you're not going to be comfortable necessarily. That's not what you're going to get when you get an outside investor. You're going to get more pressure. You're going to get higher accountability. You may not make it. You may not make it long term if you can't deliver. And that's unfathomable to a lot of founders because they started the company. How could you possibly get fired, right? And I've experienced with this. I wasn't fired, but I chose to leave a company I started, which was extremely difficult for me, for my ego, my feelings, my emotions, all these human things, human weaknesses and reactions creep into that. And so you have to, especially when you take pride in what you do. I mean, most founders and entrepreneurs take a lot of pride in what they've built. And it's hard to think that there's warts on it or it's not perfect or that someone else is going to come in and mess it up or not do it the way you would do it. And you just have to be ready to let some of that go. And that's something that I struggle with. So I imagine there's probably others out there that would struggle with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was a great conversation overall and great insight from both you and Adam.
Yeah, really interesting. I'd love to have him back on and get a pulse on the market here as things continue to evolve, especially with AI. It might be interesting to talk more about AI as it becomes more relevant in what he's doing day to day. But wanted to share with you this case study. Is a YouTube case study that we published recently about one of our clients and what they did well and what made them so successful in their implementation. So let's roll this clip and then we'll come back and talk about it here in just a second. It's been noted in many studies that somewhere between 70 and 80% or more of digital transformations fail. A lot has been written about failed ERP implementations. I've even published a lot of YouTube videos and case studies around failed implementations and the lessons learned. But oftentimes we get the question, well, what about the successful ones? What are they doing differently? And the good news is there's a lot of clear patterns that successful companies do differently than their failed counterparts. So what I want to do today is unpack a case study of Third Stages. And this is an ERP implementation that we've helped them with over the last few years. It's a very large organization, big multinational organization. They're a $25 billion steel company with around 25,000 employees. And they recently went through a big, massive ERP implementation and digital transformation. Despite their size and complexity and the overall risk of these sorts of projects, this company was extremely successful in their implementation. And it wasn't just because they hired Third Stage Consulting to help them with the project. They made some key fundamental decisions and leadership actions that helped them on the path towards success. And that's what I want to cover here today. Now, before we jump into this case study, I want to encourage you to download our ebook called Lessons from 1,000 Digital Transformations. Because a lot of the lessons we'll discuss here today from this case study influenced this particular paper. And there's a lot of details in the paper that you won't hear in this video. So I encourage you as a supplementary point of reference to download that book. You can read it for free by scanning the QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. Now, this particular case study involves a large steel company based in North America. They generate about $20 billion of revenue, and they have about 25,000 employees. And this company is very interesting because they are a highly disruptive company that completely transformed the US and North American steel industry. They really came into prominence in a time in the late 70s and into the 1980s where Japanese steel companies were dominating the US market. And what this company did is they invented the concept of a different type of steel production that completely undermined and undercut the competition. And they were able to outperform other steel competitors, and they're able to produce better products at a lower price because of this disruptive model. And the reason I share this background information with you is not only so you understand the type of company we're talking about here today and some of the manufacturing complexities and the raw material complexities that go along with it, but also because this is a large, complex organization that has disrupted an industry, an entire industry. And that's an important backdrop because that highly influenced how they managed their digital transformation and ERP project, which is what I'll continue to discuss here in this video. This company is a very well-known company, although a lot of consumers don't know about it because they produce raw steel that's used by other manufacturers and companies that build buildings and infrastructure and things of that nature. But people in the business world know this company really well. In fact, if you've ever read or heard of the book called Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, this case study is prominently featured in that book. Now, in the book, they don't talk about the digital transformation. They talk about the business model and the way they disrupted their business and how they innovated an entire industry and transformed an entire industry. So this backdrop is very important because this influences how they managed their ERP implementation and were able to be successful. Now, the first thing that this company did that's very different from their counterparts that are more commonly failing in their digital transformations is that they had a very strong business and operations focus, particularly as it relates to this particular project. Now, you may be saying to yourself, of course they had a business and operations focus. Every organization does. But this company is different. They have a very strong focus on the things that matter to their customers and the things that matter to their employees. If something is proposed that doesn't add value to one of those two parties, the customers or the employees, they don't do it. They don't get caught up in trends or buzzwords or what the competition is doing. They forge their own path based on the way they view the market and the way their customers view this particular company. Now, this is a really important point because when it comes to the digital transformation and ERP implementation, they treated that project the exact same way. They didn't even care about the technology per se. In fact, they had somewhat of an allergic reaction to technology. The people running the project were self-proclaimed anti-technologists and people that don't really understand technology, and they were some of the best leaders that I've ever worked with within a client. And the reason for that is, again, they're coming at things from a business solution perspective. If the technology that's proposed didn't fit their needs, they didn't buy it. If the software vendor or system integrator was proposing a solution or an approach that didn't make sense for the business, they didn't do it. And it was pretty cut and dry, and it's pretty simple for them. They're able to cut through a lot of the noise and a lot of the garbage that goes into these projects and a lot of the things that ultimately make these projects more complex than they need to be. This company was able to take a very complex ERP implementation and simplify it in a way that fit their business and focused only on the things that provided value to the organization and to the customers and the employees of the organization. Just as the organization and the team had a business and operations focus, this client also focused on business value. They wouldn't do things that didn't add value and ROI to the project. Just to give you some additional context, this company was using multiple ERP systems, and they were moving to consolidate as many of those systems onto one platform as they could, but also recognizing that they weren't going to necessarily move to one single platform across the entire organization. And the reason for that is because it didn't add business value. They couldn't identify the business value of having only one single system that might be a bit inflexible or not meet the needs of the entire organization, but they recognized that there was some value in consolidating some of the systems. So they were really good at identifying where that point of diminishing returns was, to where they didn't necessarily overinvest in technology or get sucked into a marketing hype sales cycle about how one single system could solve all of their problems. They didn't fall for any of that stuff. In fact, they didn't really care what the vendors had to tell them. They didn't care what the system integrator had to tell them. And at times, they didn't care what we had to tell them. And I shouldn't say they didn't care. They would take it into advisement, but they would make their own decision independent of what we thought or what other parties thought. And that's a very admirable trait that made them successful in this project. Just to give you a specific example of how they did this, the software vendor that was implementing their solution was actually implementing the legacy on-premise solution of their ERP system. During the rollout, which was about a 7-year project, the software vendor that was implementing the solution had really refocused their organization on their new cloud offering, which many software vendors have done over the years. So that part's not a surprise. But what was different here is that the vendor was trying to convince this client to stop implementing on-prem solutions and move over to the cloud solution that had just been released not too long before this point. And the organization, with our help, assessed the cloud version of that technology. And they ultimately determined that despite the fact that the vendor really wanted them to move to the cloud and they really thought that there'd be business value there, the client looked at it and said, it doesn't deliver business value. In fact, it delivers negative business value. Not only are we going to pay more for the cloud solution, but the cloud solution didn't have the same maturity, especially in some of the complex manufacturing areas that they needed capabilities in. So they politely declined and said, we're sticking to on-prem. And when the software vendor said, yeah, but everyone's moving to the cloud, yeah, but on-prem is dying, they didn't care. They didn't fall for it. They didn't take the bait. And I think that was the right decision. It made sense for this organization to implement the solution the way they did. They didn't fall into the pressure of sales hype from the software vendors. So this is a good reminder that you shouldn't make any sort of decision without first considering the business value. If the business value is there, you should probably do it. And if it's not, then you probably shouldn't. Over the years, I've worked with over 1,000 different organizations, helping them through various types of digital transformations. And I can say that hands down, this company had the most unique and probably the strongest culture of any organization I've worked with. And the reason I bring this up is because their culture was so aligned. You would meet any person from this team and they were very much on the same page. Their personalities just gelled really well together. They didn't tolerate lack of performance. They didn't tolerate dead weight. They didn't tolerate people making decisions out of self-interest that didn't benefit the company. And this is something else that was written about in Innovator's Dilemma, is their culture. And what's really interesting, even more interesting about this company, is they hated the word culture. I remember early on, I made an observation about how unique and powerful their culture was, and they didn't like that. They told me, don't mention the word culture around here. And that's my point right there. They had a very strong culture that puked all over the idea of talking about culture. To them, culture was just part of their DNA. It's just who they were, and we didn't need to talk about it, and that's fair enough. The other thing they were very good at as it relates to culture is change management. They were really good at leading change. And guess what? They also didn't like the term change management. They really didn't like it, and we had to find a different word to use. We also had to take somewhat of a Trojan horse approach to helping them through that change management because they didn't want to call it that. So that's the irony of it all, is as good as they were at culture and managing change, they didn't like the terms to describe it, but the point is they were good at it. It was baked into their DNA. And when it came time to train people and move people through the process, it was second nature to them. They knew how to do that because they'd been through so much change. They'd grown through acquisitions over the years, and those are some of the reasons why the culture and the change management components of this leadership team and this organization was so powerful. So one lesson and takeaway we can learn from this is that culture and organizational change, even if you don't want to call it that, is something that's absolutely critical to being successful in a digital transformation. Another strong success factor that this organization did that's a lot different from companies that fail in their digital transformations is that they had extreme ownership of the project. They were clearly in charge of the project. Yes, they brought in third stage consulting to help them and advise them. They brought in the software vendor. They brought in the technical system integrators. They would take all that input and leverage the strengths of those different third parties, but at the end of the day, they made the decisions. We at Third Stage did not make a single decision for them. We made recommendations, but we would never make a decision for them because they wouldn't let us and they didn't want us to. Same goes for the software vendor and the system integrator. Now, again, when I say this out loud, it sounds like common sense, but it's amazing how many organizations just defer responsibility to the software vendor or the system integrator or the outside consultants. A specific example I can give you here that ties into the example before about their resisting the temptation to move to cloud solutions prematurely. Another example is that they were noticing that the project was taking longer than expected. They noticed that decisions were taking a little longer than they thought. They were falling behind on the plan. And most organizations would probably recognize that, but they would probably just let it ride. They'd probably just keep rolling through the project, business as usual, hoping to get things back on track, hoping to correct or make up time later. And that just never happens. This company recognized that that probably wasn't going to happen with them either. So what they did is they said, guess what? We're moving slower than we assumed when we planned this project. So we're going to just embrace the fact that things are going a little slower and taking a little longer than we thought. And guess what, system integrator? We need you to cut back your staffing. Because that's where projects get into trouble, is they keep this high staffing level, assuming a shorter time frame. And then when that short time frame stretches out, maybe sometimes it doubles or triples, you've got that same staffing level that you didn't need, but you're still getting billed by the hour by those consultants. So they said, look, we know we need to stretch this out. We know you're staffing it for a shorter time frame. We need you to bring that staffing level down. And the system integrator wasn't happy about it. They fought tooth and nail to keep the resources on the project because it was in their self-interest to do so. But the client persisted, and they knew, and they had the confidence to know that that was the right answer. They didn't waver, and they went ahead and convinced the system integrator to do that, and the system integrator accommodated. So this is just one of many examples where this particular client was clearly in charge of the project. They weren't steamrolled by the software vendor or the system integrators. They managed those third parties, and they made the decisions they had to make to act in their self-interest and to do what's right for their business and for their team, regardless of what the software vendor or the system integrators might have wanted them to do instead. So how does this apply to you? What are the lessons that we can all take away here? Well, first of all, don't forget about culture and change management. Those are the things that are ultimately going to make or break a project. Make sure that your project is focused on business operations. If you lead with technology, you're more likely to fail because you're going to end up going down a bunch of rabbit holes that you don't need to, and you're going to end up spending a lot of time on money on technologies that don't make sense for your business. When you look at things from the perspective of business and operations and our strategic priorities, you're just going to make better decisions that are more aligned with your budget, with your strategic objectives, and all that good stuff. Also, focus on business value. If something's not delivering value or you can't justify it, you can't point to a tangible business case line item that justifies any sort of decision you're going to make, then you probably shouldn't do it. And then finally, and perhaps even most importantly, take ownership of your project. This is your project, just as you wouldn't outsource the building of your house without any sort of input or accountability or checkpoints along the way. You wouldn't do that, or you shouldn't do that for your ERP implementation. You need to own it. You can bring in the outside parties that you need or you think you need to help you, but at the end of the day, you have to make the decisions that are best for your business, and you're the only one that can really do that. So I hope this has provided you some guidance and lessons from a client that was extremely successful in their digital transformation. This is one of the more successful projects I've been involved with. It's one of the ones that I enjoy the most, and I think it's the one that's the most telling about the way organizations should be running their ERP implementations. If more companies ran their projects like this one did, I guarantee we wouldn't have the high failure rates that we see in this industry. So that was an overview of one of our clients in a recent multi-year, pretty big implementation and transformation that we went through and helped them through over the last few years. But Darian, I'm curious to get your thoughts and takeaways from that video.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting, especially a lot different than what we usually post. We usually see a lot more failures or just warnings about different things that are going on in the tech industry. And this was really interesting to kind of flip the script and see more of a successful story and how it was successful and learn from that side of things. One thing I found really interesting was when you said the company hated the words like culture and change management, but they were amazing at both. So it's kind of interesting in that way. But given that, do you think that some companies maybe get too caught up in buzzwords and actually forget to live out what those terms actually mean?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a good question. And I think that maybe hits the heart of why they hate the term so much, because they did not like buzzwords. I mean, that's a broader, I can't remember if I say it in the video or not, but just in general, they just didn't like buzzwords. And you could argue, well, change management and culture, those aren't really buzzwords, but to them they are. And to them, it's just like, it's just the way things are, for them. Like they are a certain way. Don't call it culture. Don't call it change management. It's just us. It's who we are. It's sort of like that was their mentality all along. And it was highly effective. But I think the key there that you're sort of alluding to is that it's baked into their DNA. It didn't matter what you call it. It didn't need a label. It was the DNA of who they are as an organization. So don't put a label on it. It was sort of the vibe or the mentality you get from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point I guess I found really interesting in this video was that the company refused to move to cloud even when the vendor was pushing it. And I feel like this is obviously something that probably a lot of businesses are relating to right now. What's your advice for companies trying to push back on vendors when the hype of cloud doesn't match the reality that the business is actually wanting?
I think it's a good question. I think it's just having confidence and clarity around what you want and expect for your business. I mean, that was at the end of the day why this company was so comfortable and confident pushing back on their vendors, is because they knew they didn't have all the answers, but they knew what they wanted to be when they grew up. They knew what they were trying to accomplish, and if it didn't fit that, they didn't want to hear about it. And in the way I describe them, it may sound like they're closed-minded or they don't listen to experts or outside advice. They do. They listen. They listen to us. But there were times where they told us, like, we hear you, but that's just not at all something that's going to work for us. I see why we work for other clients of yours, but it's just not something we're interested in. And honestly, there's times where I agreed with them. I'd say, now that you've described that and you've pushed back and you've described why you don't think it's a good fit, it actually makes sense. But I think that's more it is. They just had so much clarity, confidence, alignment, and I hate to use too many buzzwords here, but they had all those things. When I say clarity, confidence, and alignment, they as an executive and a leadership team are all on the same page, rolling in the same direction. They're all the things that most companies aren't, in terms of, we didn't get 10 different opinions when we asked 10 different people what the transformation meant to them or what they're trying to accomplish. We'd get the same answer, and which shows us that they were all on the same page. Their communication is extremely effective. They're not at all like a touchy-feely, kumbaya singing sort of organization, but the people there, you would think if you met the people, you would think they must be, because everyone there is so driven and so happy and, so much on the same page, but they weren't at all that way. It was just sort of business as usual. Let's just get the job done. I mean, they had a really interesting mix of like blue collar mentality, because most of their executives and their leaders came up the ranks, like the CEO at the time. He's retired now, but the CEO at kind of the height of when we were working there, he used to be a shop floor worker. In fact, he had a physical injury, permanent injury from having worked on the shop floor. So you look at him, it was very evident that he grew up, in a manufacturing environment. So anyway, point being, like, these are all like blue collar guys and gals that really gritty, a real gritty group. They're not super theoretical or academic, not fluffy, none of that stuff, but they're all on the same page and they're heading the same direction, which is what made them so successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last question. You said that if more companies operated like this, we wouldn't see such high failure rates. What is one mindset shift every company needs to adopt today if they want their transformation to be successful like this one?
Oh, good question. If I picked one, and especially related to this case study, I'd say take ownership of your transformation. And by taking ownership of your transformation, it's going to force you to get on the same page as a leadership team on what you expect from the project, how you're going to manage it, what kind of governance and parameters you're going to put in place, all that good stuff. It's also going to force you to challenge your vendors and get realistic expectations for what the project's really going to look like. It's going to lead to more likely to be that you build the internal competencies you need to be successful longer term. You're not going to have that learned helplessness of, oh gosh, I need to change something now. I need to bring in the consultants to change, a tiny part of my business. All that stuff goes away when you have that, that ownership, that extreme ownership of the project. So that'd be the one thing I'd pick, is just take ownership. And by having that ownership, it leads to mitigating a lot of other risks downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great episode today. Lots of good topics that are a little bit different than usual.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun stuff. Hopefully you enjoyed it too, the audience, and I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. So be sure to drop those in the chat, whether it's related to the case study, the interview, or all of the above. Love to hear your feedback, and we'll get to your audience questions and comments in future episodes of this podcast as well. So thanks for joining us here today. You'd like to learn more about Third Stage Consulting and how we can help your transformation journey be more successful in a tech agnostic way, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. So my team and I would be happy to brainstorm with you, even if it's just informally, off the meter, off the record, whatever you want to call it. Happy to chat with you and brainstorm ideas as it relates to your project. So feel free to reach out. And in the meantime, we'll see you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you soon. Take care.